My brother didn't need a gun to steal my father's life. He used a motel key, a smile, and a stack of papers. By the time I found my dad under a buzzing yellow light off Route 18, strangers were already walking our farm like it was theirs. I was 39 when my brother tried to erase me from my own family. Not with a knife, not with a shouted threat, nothing that dramatic. He did it with paperwork, smiles, half-truths, and one motel room on the edge of town that smelled like mildew, burnt coffee, and something old people should never have to breathe in. My name is Caleb Mercer, and before everything fell apart, the Mercer farm had been the only place in the world that ever felt permanent to me. 211 acres in western Missouri, soybeans on the south field, corn in the upper stretch, a weather-beaten red barn that leaned a little more every winter but somehow never gave up. My grandfather built that place with his brothers after coming back from the war, and my father, Walter Mercer, spent his whole life protecting it like it was a living thing. To him it was. He used to say land remembers who loved it. When I was a kid, I believed him. I still do. The trouble started long before the motel, long before the sale papers, long before I stood in a lawyer's office with my pulse hammering in my throat, realizing just how far my own brother had gone. It started with my father forgetting small things. At first, it was harmless, or at least that's what we told ourselves. He'd misplace his keys in the freezer, call the dog by my dead mother's name, ask me what day it was 3 times in one morning, then laugh it off with that embarrassed little shrug that made my chest tighten every single time. My father had always been a hard man. Not cruel, just solid. He woke up before sunrise, drank his coffee black, and never sat down until the work was done. Even after my mother died, he kept going, especially after she died. I think the farm was the only thing that kept him from collapsing under the weight of that grief, so when his memory started slipping, it felt wrong in a way I can't fully explain, like seeing a church bell melt. My older brother, Shane, didn't see it that way. Or maybe he did, and he saw something else too, opportunity. Shane was 44, 5 years older than me, and if you ask strangers, they'd probably say he was charming. He knew how to shake hands, how to grin at the right moment, how to make a lie sound like concern. He'd left the farm years earlier, bounced between used car lots, investment opportunities, and one failed landscaping business after another. He always had a reason things didn't work out, and somehow it was never his fault. I stayed, not because I was noble, not because I had no dreams. I stayed because somebody had to. I worked the farm with Dad. I handled repairs. I did the books when his eyesight got worse. When his doctor first suggested cognitive testing, I was the one who drove him into the city and sat in that beige office while he stared at the floor and picked at the seam of his cap. Shane didn't come. He said he was busy. That was his favorite word. Busy. Busy when Dad got lost driving home from the feed store. Busy when I found unpaid bills stuffed into the sugar jar. Busy when Dad forgot that Mom had been dead for 8 years and asked me, in a trembling voice, why she hadn't come down for supper. I still remember that night. The kitchen smelled like ham and onions. The old clock above the sink ticked so loud it felt cruel. Dad sat there in his denim jacket, staring toward the hallway, waiting for footsteps that would never come. "Your mother's resting?" he asked me. My hand froze around the serving spoon. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Then I said, "Yeah, Dad, she's resting." He nodded slowly, like that made sense, and went back to folding his napkin into tiny squares. I stood at the stove with tears burning my eyes and told myself I was strong enough for this. I had to be. A month later, the diagnosis came. Early-stage dementia, likely progressing faster than average. The doctor was kind, careful, practiced. He used words like planning, support, monitoring, safety. Dad listened with his jaw clenched and his eyes fixed on the diplomas behind the doctor's head. On the drive home, he didn't say much. About 10 miles from the farm, he finally looked out the passenger window and said, Don't let him sell it. I tightened my grip on the wheel. I didn't need to ask who he meant. Shane had been circling the land for years. Not because he loved it, because developers had started sniffing around the county. There was talk of a highway expansion, a distribution center, good money for the right parcel. Our farm sat in the kind of location that made greedy men suddenly sound very friendly. Dad knew it. That's why, 6 months before the diagnosis, he'd signed power of attorney over to me, medical and financial. Not because he loved Shane less, because he trusted me more. He said it plain, sitting at the dining room table with his reading glasses low on his nose and the old legal pad in front of him. You'll do what's right even if it hurts you, he told me. Your brother only does what's right if it pays. I didn't feel proud hearing that, just sad. Because he was right. The paperwork was done properly, witnessed, notarized, filed. Our family attorney, Mr. Bellamy, handled everything. I kept copies in a fireproof box in my bedroom closet, and another set in the office drawer behind Dad's old tax records. I prayed I'd never need them. That was my second mistake. The first was thinking Shane would stay away. For a while, he did the opposite. He showed up more. He started coming by every Sunday with donuts and fake patience. He'd sit at the kitchen table talking too loudly, patting Dad on the shoulder, calling him old man in that playful tone that always sounded a little rehearsed to me. He brought brochures about senior living communities, talked about how much work the farm was, how stressful, how dangerous. Caleb can't do this forever, he'd say, leaning back in the chair like a man making perfect sense. And you deserve to enjoy what time you've got. What time you've got. I hated that phrase. Dad usually just stared at him, confused or tired or both. Sometimes he got agitated. Sometimes he forgot Shane had already asked the same question 20 minutes earlier. And every time Shane left, the house felt colder. I confronted him once in the driveway. The gravel crunched under my boots. The evening air smelled like diesel and cut hay. He was climbing into his truck when I said, "Stop pushing him." Shane shut the door and gave me that look. Half amused, half insulted. I'm trying to help. No, I said, you're trying to soften him up. He laughed. Actually laughed. You always did think you were the hero around here. And you always show up when there's money involved. That wiped the smile off his face. For a second, I saw the real Shane. The one underneath the charm. Hard eyes, thin lips. A flash of something mean, then it was gone. He stepped closer and lowered his voice. You think that little piece of paper makes you king? I didn't answer, because in that moment, something inside me went cold. He knew about the power of attorney. I should have understood then that he wouldn't just accept it. Men like Shane never accept closed doors. They look for windows, weak hinges, fire exits. He found one in my exhaustion. That winter was brutal. Dad started wandering at night. Twice I found him outside in the dark, wearing only slippers and his old brown coat, saying he needed to get to the east pasture before his father saw the fence line. His father had been dead for 30 years. I barely slept. I was running the farm, managing his medications, cooking, cleaning, handling doctor visits, and trying not to drown under the constant fear that one mistake would cost him his life. Friends told me to get help. I tried. Home care in our county was expensive and unreliable, and Dad hated strangers touching his things. Then I got sick. Nothing dramatic. A chest infection that turned into a fever that pinned me flat for nearly a week. I could still stand, still shuffle around, but I wasn't thinking straight. My lungs felt full of wet cement, and every time I coughed, my vision sparked. That was when Shane made his move. He came over acting concerned, brought soup, offered to take Dad for a few days so I could recover. I should have said no. God, I should have thrown him off the porch. But Dad was restless. I was weak. Shane sounded reasonable. He said he'd booked a place in town close to the clinic so Dad could have supervision without all the farm stress. A place in town. That was how he said it. Not motel. Not room 12 with stained curtains and a broken ice machine outside the door. By the time I was well enough to drive into town and check on Dad myself, the farm was already being shown to buyers. And my father, the man who had spent 50 years defending that land, was living under a buzzing fluorescent light beside a highway, while my brother tried to sell everything he loved. What Shane forgot, in all his hurry and greed, was one simple thing. Dad's mind was slipping, mine wasn't. And the power of attorney he thought he could work around, it was still in my name. The first thing I noticed when I pulled into the motel parking lot was my father's truck. Not Shane's. Dad's. It was parked crooked across two faded yellow lines, caked with road salt. The passenger door not fully shut. My stomach dropped so hard it felt like I'd missed a step in the dark. The motel sat just off the highway outside Millhaven, the kind of place people only used when they had no better option or something to hide. The vacancy sign buzzed in the gray afternoon. Half the letters were dead. A torn American flag snapped weakly over the office. The whole building looked tired, peeling paint, rust on the railings, curtains drawn tight like the rooms were ashamed to be seen. I killed the engine and just sat there for a second with both hands locked around the steering wheel. My father was inside that place. The same man who used to refuse roadside diners because he said the coffee tasted like mop water was now sleeping in a motel off Route 18 while strangers walked through our farm. I could feel my pulse in my throat. When I got out, the wind cut straight through my jacket. It smelled like wet asphalt and cigarette smoke. I crossed the lot fast, my boots splashing through shallow puddles, and headed for room 12 because I'd already asked at the front desk before the clerk could stop me. Older man with a red nose, looking bored and nervous at the same time. The minute I said Walter Mercer, his eyes flicked toward the hallway like he knew exactly what kind of mess he was standing next to. The door to room 12 wasn't fully latched. I pushed it open and froze. Dad was sitting on the edge of the bed in his coat, staring at the television even though it was muted. The room was dim and yellow. One lamp worked. The carpet was stained. There was a styrofoam cup on the nightstand, a plastic bag from a pharmacy, and a half-eaten sandwich turning hard on wax paper. He looked smaller. That's what hit me first. Not sick, not broken, smaller. Like the room itself had pressed in on him and shaved pieces off his shoulders. His cap was in his hands. He kept turning it slowly, over and over, rubbing the brim with his thumb the way he did when he was anxious. "Dad," I said. He blinked once, then looked up. For a second, there was nothing in his face, just confusion. Then recognition came in a flicker. "Caleb." Gallaby. My chest tightened so hard it hurt. I crossed the room in 3 strides and knelt in front of him. He smelled like stale detergent, cold air, and that sharp medicinal scent hospitals always carry. His eyes were bloodshot. There was stubble on his jaw. He hadn't shaved in days. "What are you doing here?" I asked softly, already knowing he wouldn't really be able to answer. He looked around the room like he was seeing it for the first time. "Your brother said," he paused, swallowed. "Said the house needed work." I closed my eyes for 1 second. Just one. When I opened them, I kept my voice steady. "What kind of work?" He frowned. I don't know. Something with the pipes, or the roof." He looked embarrassed suddenly, like he knew the story didn't hold together. "He said just for a little while." A little while. The sheets were wrinkled. There were 2 pill bottles open on the table, and one of them was mine. Medication I had organized by date and dosage back at the farm. Shane had just thrown the bottles in a plastic sack like spare screws. I stood and checked the bathroom. 1 towel. Damp. No toothbrush in the holder. No razor. No clean clothes except a duffel bag shoved under the sink with Dad's flannel shirts folded badly, like someone had packed in a hurry and didn't care what got creased. No Shane. Of course. I stepped back into the room and said, "Where is he?" Dad looked down at his hands. "Out." "Out where?" He shook his head. "Meeting." The word came out uncertain. "Borrowed." I walked to the window, pulled the curtain back an inch and looked at the parking lot. No sign of Shane's truck. My jaw tightened so hard it clicked. Then I heard Dad behind me. Did I do something wrong? I turned too fast. He was looking at me with that same old expression he used to wear when I was a boy, and he'd accidentally snapped at me after a long day. Regret? Confusion? A need for reassurance he didn't know how to ask for. And just like that, the anger inside me shifted shape, still hot, still dangerous. But now it had a direction. No, I said, walking back to him. No, Dad, you didn't do anything wrong. He nodded slowly, but his eyes stayed troubled. I wanted to go home. That almost broke me. I sat beside him on the bed, close enough that our shoulders touched. The springs groaned under our weight. Outside, a truck downshifted on the highway. The sound long and ugly. You should have called me. He stared at the cap in his hands. Shane said you were sick. Said not to bother you. There it was. Simple. Filthy. Effective. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, and forced myself to breathe before I said something I couldn't take back in front of him. After a minute, I asked, "Did he bring anyone to the farm?" Dad didn't answer right away. His brow furrowed. "Men," I said. "Did strange men come to the house?" He looked up at me then, and something in his face shifted. Fear, maybe, or memory trying to claw its way through fog. "They walked the south field," he murmured. Every muscle in my body locked. Who did? Two of them. One in a blue coat. One had shiny shoes. He looked at the floor. I told Shane they shouldn't be there. My hands curled into fists between my knees. What did he say? Dad licked his lips. Said I was tired. Said I should rest. I stared at the stained carpet, seeing none of it. Shiny shoes. Developers or brokers? Maybe both. While I was home coughing my lungs out and trusting my brother for 48 stupid hours, he'd started showing the land, not talking about it, not planning, showing it. My father reached out suddenly and touched my sleeve. "Don't be mad." His voice was so quiet I almost missed it. I looked at him. Really looked. The deep lines around his mouth. The tired eyes. The way his hands trembled when he held still too long. He didn't know the full shape of what was happening. He only knew tension. Voices. Being moved around like furniture. Feeling wrong and not being able to explain why. "I'm not mad at you," I said. That much was true. I stood and pulled out my phone. Shane didn't answer the first call, or the second. On the third, it went to voicemail. I almost threw the phone through the lamp. Instead, I called the farm. No answer. I called Mr. Bellamy's office next. Closed for the day. Then I called Travis Nolan, who leased the north haylot from us every spring and lived less than 3 miles from the property. He picked up on the second ring. "Caleb? You at home?" "Yeah, why?" "Has anyone been out to the farm?" A pause. Then, "You mean besides your brother?" Ice slid down my spine. "Tell me." "I saw a black SUV there yesterday. Then another one this morning. Thought maybe you knew." He hesitated. "There were folks walking the fence line. One of them had a clipboard." I turned away from Dad so he wouldn't hear the sound I made. Not a word. More like air forced through clenched teeth. "Did they go inside?" "Couldn't tell. Barn was open. Front gate too." "Did Shane say anything to you?" "Just that the family was making changes." Family was making changes. I thanked him, hung up, and stood there staring at the wall while the motel heater rattled like it was about to die. Shane wasn't improvising anymore. He had a plan, and plans leave paper trails. I looked around the room again, slower this time, really seeing it. There was a folder on the dresser under a local diner menu. Cheap Manila, creased. My pulse jumped. I picked it up and opened it. Inside were printouts. Maps of the property, parcel outlines, tax assessment copies, a market analysis with our acreage highlighted in yellow, and on top, clipped neatly to the stack, was a one-page letter of intent from a regional development group based in Kansas City. Preliminary offer, pending family approval and title review. I felt my face go numb. He hadn't just shown the property. He was already negotiating. My father looked up at me. "What is it?" I closed the folder carefully. Too carefully. "Nothing you need to worry about right now." He watched me. Not convinced, but too tired to push. I knelt in front of him again and said, "I'm taking you home." His eyes widened a little. "Home?" "Yes." He glanced toward the door as if expecting Shane to walk in and stop us. "Can we?" That word, can, like he needed permission. I swallowed hard. "Yes, sir, we can." He nodded, and for the first time since I arrived, some of the tension went out of his shoulders. Packing took less than 5 minutes, which somehow made it worse. A man's whole life reduced to a duffel bag, 2 pill bottles, and a coat that still smelled faintly like the machine shed. I signed something at the front desk, while the clerk avoided my eyes. When I asked how long the room had been rented, he said, "A week, maybe more," in the tone of a man who wanted no part of the truth. A week. My father had been here a week. I helped him into the truck because he was moving slower than usual, stiff from bad sleep and worse air. He winced getting up into the seat and tried to hide it. I buckled him in before he could argue. As I shut the passenger door, he caught my wrist. "Caleb." I leaned down. "Don't fight your brother in front of me." The late afternoon light hit his face just wrong, carving every year into him. I wanted to promise him peace. I really did. But my brother had put him in a motel and tried to sell his land while his mind was failing. So what I said was, "I'll handle it." He let go. The drive back to the farm was quiet. Dad dozed on and off, waking every so often to ask what road we were on. I answered every time. Same tone, same words. I didn't let my anger into my voice, but inside, it was building. Not wild, not reckless, precise. Because rage burns hot and fast. What I needed now was colder than that. By the time the farmhouse came into view, dusk had started settling over the fields. The porch light was on. The barn door stood half open and parked beside the machine shed, lit by the last gray stripe of evening, was Shane's truck. Good. I wanted him there. I helped Dad inside first. The house smelled like dust, old wood, and the faint leftover scent of the beef stew I'd made before I got sick. Home, real home. Dad stood in the kitchen for a long moment, looking around like a man returned from a bad dream. Then he touched the back of one of the chairs and let out a breath that sounded almost like relief. "I'm tired," he said. "I know." I got him settled in his room, made sure he took the right pills, brought him water, and waited until his eyes closed. He looked older in sleep, more fragile, but at least he was under his own roof. Then I walked back down the hall. Every board creaked under my boots. The house was dark, except for the kitchen light and the weak yellow glow over the sink. I stepped out onto the back porch and saw Shane by the shed, smoking like he didn't have a care in the world. He turned when he heard me. For one long second, neither of us spoke. The cold bit at my face. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. The field stretched black and silent beyond us. Then Shane flicked his cigarette into the dirt and said, almost casually, "You should have called first." I walked down the porch steps. "You put him in a motel." He shrugged. "It was temporary. You told him the house needed work. He needed supervision." I kept moving until I was close enough to see the red veins in his eyes and the smug set of his mouth. "You brought buyers onto this land that landed, not hard, but enough." His face changed just slightly. "Potential buyers," he said. "Nothing official." I held up the folder I'd taken from room 12. His eyes dropped to it, then back to me, and in that moment, I knew two things for certain. First, he'd gone much farther than he was prepared to admit. And second, this was only the beginning. Shane's eyes stayed on the folder for half a second too long. That was all I needed. The cold air sat heavy between us. My breath came out in white bursts. Somewhere behind me, the back porch light buzzed like an angry insect. Shane straightened a little, trying to recover the swagger he'd worn like armor his whole life. "You went through Dad's things?" he asked. I almost laughed. "His things?" I said. "You dumped him in a roadside motel with a bag of pills and a stale sandwich, and that's your question?" His jaw tightened. "You always make everything sound worse than it is." "No," I said quietly. "You do that. You shrink ugly things until they fit inside a lie." He stepped closer, boots grinding against frozen dirt. "You don't know what you're talking about." I lifted the folder and pulled out the letter of intent. The paper shook once in the wind. Preliminary offer, parcel maps, title review. You weren't thinking about selling, Shane. You were already doing it. His face hardened. For the first time that night, the mask slipped for good. "So what if I was?" he snapped. "Dad's gone, Caleb. Maybe not in the ground, but gone enough. He can't run this place. You can't keep tying yourself to a dying farm because you're too scared to live anywhere else." The words hit hard, not because they were true, because they were cruel in exactly the way Shane always chose to be when cornered. I took one step closer. "Say that again," I said. He looked toward the house, then back at me, and lowered his voice. "I'm trying to save us. By stealing from him? By making a decision you were too weak to make?" That word, weak. My father was asleep 20 yards away after a week in a motel because I had trusted the wrong man for 2 days. My hands curled so tight I could feel my nails digging crescents into my palms. But I didn't swing. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. Instead, I said, "You're done here." He gave a short, ugly laugh. "You think that little power of attorney makes you untouchable?" "No," I said. "I think the law does." Something flickered in his face then. Not fear exactly, but calculation changing course. He folded his arms. "You don't have proof of anything." I stared at him. Then I reached into the folder and pulled out another page. A motel receipt, room 12, paid with Shane Mercer's card. 7 nights. Behind that, a printout from the front desk. Guest listed, Walter Mercer. Emergency contact, Shane Mercer. Notes section, cognitive issues. Son handling all arrangements. I watched the blood drain from his face one shade at a time. "I also have the clerk who checked you in," I said. "And Travis saw the buyers. And the title company will have records of who requested the parcel review. Do you want me to keep going?" His mouth opened, closed. For once in his life, Shane had run out of easy words. The wind pushed at the loose barn door behind him, making it knock softly against the frame. He looked toward the truck, then toward the road, and I saw it happen. That tiny shift in his eyes when a man realizes the path he thought was open has narrowed to a crack. "You'd call the cops on your own brother?" he said. I didn't answer right away, because the truth was, a part of me still couldn't believe we were standing here. 2 boys who used to sleep in bunk beds under the same leaking roof, now facing each other in the dark like enemies over our father's bones before he was even gone. Then I thought of the motel room. The yellow light, the stale air, my father asking if he had done something wrong, and whatever softness was left in me went cold. "Yes," I said. Shane stared at me. I think he expected hesitation, a crack, some last appeal to blood. But blood had already been used up. He spat into the dirt and muttered, "Unbelievable." "No," I said. "What's unbelievable is that Dad spent a week in that place while you played businessman with land you don't own." He flinched at that, just slightly. Then he tried one last angle. "You think he wanted this? You think he'd want his sons tearing each other apart?" I looked at the house. A thin line of warm light showed beneath Dad's bedroom door. The old place stood quiet behind us, weathered but stubborn, like it had survived every storm by refusing to be moved. "He wanted honesty," I said, "and he wanted that land protected. You know that." Shane's eyes narrowed. "He always picked you." That stopped me, not because it shocked me, because it sounded so small, so old, like he wasn't 44 standing in a field after trying to gut our father's life, but 14 again, sulking because Dad trusted me to drive the tractor straight. I let out a slow breath. "No," I said. "He trusted the one who stayed." That landed harder than anything else had. He looked away first. For a second I thought he might charge me, or beg, or break. Instead he just looked tired. Not sorry. Never that. Just tired in the way selfish people get when their schemes become inconvenient. "What now?" he muttered. "Now you leave. And if I don't," I pulled out my phone. He held my gaze for 3 full seconds. Then he cursed under his breath, turned, yanked open his truck door, and climbed in hard enough to rattle the whole frame. The engine started with a violent roar. He backed out too fast, spraying gravel, and tore down the drive without another word. I stood there long after the taillights disappeared. The cold soaked through my jacket. My heart was still pounding. But underneath the anger, underneath the shock, there was something else slowly rising. Not victory, just clarity. The next morning, I called Mr. Bellamy the minute his office opened. He listened without interrupting while I laid everything out. The motel, the buyers, the parcel review, the letter of intent. When I finished, there was a long silence on the line. Then he said, "Bring every document you have. And Caleb, you did the right thing bringing your father home first." By 10 o'clock, I was sitting across from him in his office, with the folder spread open between us. Sunlight came through the blinds in narrow white bars. Dust floated in the air. Mr. Bellamy looked older than I remembered, but sharper too. The kind of man who had spent 40 years watching families destroy themselves over less than this. He adjusted his glasses and tapped the power of attorney copy with one finger. "This protects you," he said. "More importantly, it protects Walter. Your brother had no authority to relocate him, negotiate on his behalf, or initiate a sale. Can he challenge it? He can try. Men like Shane usually do." Mr. Bellamy leaned back. "But the paperwork is solid, and with Walter's diagnosis on record, any attempt to force a transaction now would be heavily scrutinized." I nodded, but my shoulders didn't loosen, because paperwork is one thing. Family is another. "What do I need to do?" He folded his hands. "First, we file notice with the county that all inquiries regarding the property must come through your office or mine. Second, we send a cease and desist to the development group and any brokerage involved. Third," he paused, "you should consider guardianship proceedings before the disease progresses further." That hit me harder than I expected. Guardianship. Final. Legal. Public. Another line crossed. I looked down at the desk and swallowed. Would Dad have to be in court? Likely not for long. We can request accommodations. "Caleb, this isn't about taking his dignity. It's about making sure no one can use his confusion against him again." I knew he was right. Still, hearing it made my chest ache, because every necessary step felt like another small funeral. By noon, the letters were drafted. By evening, copies had gone out to the broker, the developers, the title company, And Shane, Mr. Bellamy also advised me to document everything from that point forward. So I did. Every phone call, every visit, every change in Dad's condition. I bought a notebook that night and started writing in it at the kitchen table while the coffee went cold beside me. 3 days passed without a word from Shane. Then, on the fourth, he showed up, not alone. He brought our Aunt Denise, who loved keeping the peace, as long as peace meant everyone letting the loudest liar speak first. I saw their car pull in just after lunch. Dad was napping in his chair. I stepped onto the porch before they reached the steps. Denise gave me that pinched, wounded smile people use when they want to pretend they're above the mess while standing in the middle of it. "Caleb," she said, "we just want to talk." Shane stood behind her in a clean jacket, hair combed, face arranged into something humble. It almost would have worked on someone who hadn't seen him in the dark 4 nights earlier. "No," I said. Denise blinked. "Excuse me? You can talk to Mr. Bellamy." Shane exhaled through his nose. "Don't do this." "I'm not. You did." Denise stepped forward. "Your brother made mistakes, yes, but dragging lawyers and legal threats into a family matter?" I cut her off. "He put our father in a motel and tried to sell his farm while he was confused." Her mouth snapped shut. Shane jumped in fast. "That is not what happened." I looked straight at Denise. "Would you like to see the motel receipt?" The silence that followed was beautiful. Not satisfying, not happy, just clean. Denise turned slowly toward Shane. He wouldn't meet her eyes. That was enough. She didn't apologize to me. People like Denise never apologize for arriving on the wrong side. They just retreat with dignity clutched tight around their throats like a scarf. She muttered something about calling later and went back to the car. Shane stayed. For a moment, I thought he might finally say it. "Sorry, I was wrong." I don't know what came over me. Instead, he said, "You've made your point." I stared at him. Then I said the truest thing I'd said all week. "No, I haven't even started." He left after that, and this time he looked afraid. The guardianship hearing happened 3 weeks later. It was quick, quiet, sad. Dad wore his good brown suit, the one Mom bought him for church anniversaries before she died. He seemed tired but calm. At one point, while we waited in the hallway, he looked at me and asked if we were there about the feed order. I told him yes. I hated myself for lying, but I hated the disease more. The judge was respectful. Mr. Bellamy handled most of the speaking. Medical records were reviewed. The diagnosis was discussed in soft, careful language that somehow made it feel even more brutal. Shane didn't contest it. He didn't even show. By the end of the afternoon, I was my father's legal guardian. We drove home in silence. Halfway there, Dad looked out at the winter fields and said, "Your mother liked that sycamore." I gripped the wheel tighter. "Yeah," I said, "she did." He nodded and closed his eyes. That spring, the south field flooded worse than usual. The barn roof needed patching. Dad had more bad days than good ones. Sometimes he still knew me right away. Sometimes he called me by his brother's name. Once, just once, he looked at me across the breakfast table and asked where Walter was. I went outside after that and stood behind the shed until I could breathe again. But he was home. Always home. Never in a motel again. As for Shane, the county investigation into the unauthorized property representations never became criminal. There hadn't been a signed sale. No money changed hands. Just enough evidence to bury him professionally and socially, which in a small county can be worse than jail if your whole life runs on handshakes. The development group blacklisted him. The local broker denied ever formally engaging him once Mr. Bellamy's letters went out. People talked. They always do. By summer, Shane had left Missouri for Arkansas or Oklahoma or some other place where his name still meant nothing. He never called Dad again. I wish I could say that bothered my father. Maybe on some level it did. But the disease kept moving, slow and merciless, sanding down the sharp edges of memory until names and faces became weather. Dad died 18 months later in his own bed with the bedroom window cracked open because he liked fresh air even in October. I was there. I held his hand. His breathing had been shallow all day. The room smelled like clean sheets, medicine, and the cedar chest at the foot of the bed. Evening light fell across the quilt in long orange strips. For a while, he just stared at the ceiling. Then, very softly, he said, "Don't let him sell it." The same words from the truck after the diagnosis. I leaned close and said, "I won't, Dad." He turned his head toward me. His eyes were cloudy, but for one clear, piercing second, he knew exactly who I was, and he smiled. Not big, not dramatic, just my father's smile. Tired, certain, proud. He was gone before sunrise. I buried him beside Mom on the hill above the west pasture. The sycamore was turning gold. The land was quiet. Mr. Bellamy read the will 2 weeks later, though I already knew most of it. Dad left the farm, the house, the equipment, and the remaining acreage to me in trust, with a conservation clause that prevented future development without unanimous family consent. Shane got one thing: Granddad's watch. That was all. No one said much when they heard it, because by then everyone understood. A will doesn't only divide property, sometimes it reveals character. It's been 3 years now. The farm is still here. The barn still leans. The porch still creaks. The south field still floods if the spring gets too mean. I hired help eventually, leased part of the acreage, and turned the old machine shed into a small repair shop that keeps me afloat better than row crops ever did. It's not glamorous, but it's honest. Sometimes, at dusk, I sit on the back steps with a cup of coffee and listen to the wind move through the soybeans. The air smells like dirt and cut grass and rain coming from miles away, and if the light hits the fields just right, I can almost see every version of this place at once. My grandfather breaking ground, my mother hanging wash, my father walking fence lines with that stubborn gait of his, me, younger, angrier, still thinking I had to earn love by carrying everything alone. I know better now. Love isn't proven by how much you endure in silence. Sometimes love is paperwork. Sometimes it's saying no. Sometimes it's standing in the cold with your own brother and refusing to let greed dress itself up as family. If you've ever been the one who stayed, the one who carried the weight while others circled for what was left, then you know this already. Being loyal doesn't mean being blind. And blood means nothing if it empties a man of his dignity. My father was right. Land remembers who loved it. That's why I'm still here. And that's why, as long as I'm breathing, no one will ever sell this farm.